Hello and welcome to another session of design technology, and this one is specifically about psychological factors, right? So a couple of things that we're going to go over is these psychological factor data, human information processing, and then we talk a lot about how this is measured, similarly to anthropometrics. And then going through looking at some certain situations, how things can change and what happens, okay? So as a reminder, there are in human factors and ergonomics. Remember that ergonomics is that measurement or that ability to understand objects and humans. And there's three parts to human factors and ergonomics: anthropometrics, physiological factors, and psychological factors. So for this video, we'll focus on psychological factors, these kind of mental behaviors that you see and notice with design or architecture or in lots of other places, all right? So this slide is pretty important. A couple of things that are really important to psychological factor, they have to do with efficiency and comfort and how people or individuals react to certain places or situations or areas or characteristics or qualities, and how efficient or how comfortable certain things are. So there's temperature, sound, light, texture, color, and taste and smell. So all these things can affect a person's mood or comfort or efficiency to perform tasks and to be in certain environments. So you can see, you can read through these a couple of examples, but it's also texture is things like grip and friction. Smell is things like odors, toxins, aromas. You know how that makes a bit of a difference. Fresh bread or smells in markets, they make your senses, or they make you psychologically think differently. Sound, same thing, high volume, low volume. It makes a difference in the way that people work and what happens. So one of the best examples, or one that I think most people are interested in, is color. So the psychology of color is a very deep topic. We could talk about it for a while, but here's this general graph about color. So like we had talked about a little bit in class where McDonald's uses red because it produces hunger in some way. A lot of blue stuff is for healthcare because it promotes safety and comfort. Green has a lot of things to do with the environment, so that's why they choose some of these colors. You can look on the website and you'll be able to see, or on the slides, and you'll be able to see a little bit more detail about cheerfulness, strong emotions, based on the different colors, okay? So you can have a look a little bit more. Another thing, so that's color. Talked about that one. Another one is temperature. So temperature does affect the way that you feel in certain spaces, right? You have a hammock in this beautiful environment, very relaxing, very nice, versus the same product but in a different environment, and it changes your psychological factors pretty significantly, okay? So you can imagine how those things affect your mood or environment or your comfort or the efficiency in those particular spaces. So not so comfortable, maybe quite comfortable, based on these qualities, okay? So next up is a question, just to check a little bit of your learning inside the form. One of the first two questions are, what are the 6 major psychological factors? And then the next question is, outline one advantage related to human factors of designing the pen with the soft rubber finish. So remember, when you outline, it's an answer plus a description. So I bet you can guess what one of your answer is, and I bet you could guess what one of your description is, okay? So try to answer that, press pause, fill out the form, and try to answer that question, okay? All right, welcome back. So after you have answered this question, now we move on to, how do you collect all this information? So how do you know that space is efficient or optimal or it's comfortable? How do you know that? you can just ask somebody, hey, what do you think? But again, similar to anthropometrics, is you can actually put scientific data and collect information to prove that that's true or not true. So 3 kind of big things are interviews, questionnaires, and observations. So to see what people think about these spaces. So interviews, surveys, observations, tests, case studies. There's 3 different ways to do it, or 4 different ways. But also, more specifically, are these types of questions. So there's 4 different types of scales or ways to collect data or to make a question. And then there's 2 types of data. Maybe you've heard of it before, qualitative versus quantitative data. So qualitative, I've tried to underline in bold here, is about the quality of the data or the information. So it's a bit subjective. So anybody could say it's not really, there's no number on it that gives you a clear information. Versus quantitative does have a quantity or a number fixed to it that could give you some data to work with. And these 4 we'll talk about: nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But remember, all of this is to try to collect data for these types of things, for this efficiency, for comfort, to try to understand about color, to understand about temperature, texture. So it's a way that you can collect data. So one of the first ones about these levels or how to measure information is nominal. And essentially, nominal is just a name. So you put a name or a word to be able to classify things into different categories. So an example of a question is, what color is your hair? Here's a word. It's not on a scale of 1 to 4. It's not on a scale of A to B, but it's just that word. So where do you live? What's your gender? It's these specific words. Okay, so that's nominal, like a name to help you try to remember. Nominal is close to name. Okay, you can always click on these links too if you want to find a little bit more information out about them. They're pretty helpful. Or you could just keep listening to me. The other one is ordinal. So nominal, ordinal. The way order works is you put things on a scale of generally 1 to 5, 1 to 10, 1 to 4. So how do you feel today? Based on a scale of 1 to 5. 5 being not happy, 1 being not happy, 5 being very happy. So you're thinking about looking in that order of how do you feel. And then based on that, you can collect a whole bunch of data. So mostly people say 2, mostly people say 3. You guys have been more familiar with surveys, so you've probably seen some of these ones before. You know, how much do you agree or disagree with these certain things? So that's what ordinal is. This is probably one of the most common ones because you can also take it and it becomes quantitative. Though it's a qualitative about quality, it gives you a number that allows it to be quantitative. Okay, so this one is very common. The other 2 are interval and ratio. So interval scales are very specific. It's similar to ordinal, but the thing is there's a very specific measurable difference between 1 to 5. So rather than just, this is a bit abstract, right? I feel very happy. What's the difference between 1 and 2? You don't really know. Versus interval, it's a very specific number. There's an actual and equal measurement between different scales. So time is an example of one. So if you've got time, people come in at different times. There's a very specific time or distance between the different measurements, how long certain things take, because they're all the equal distance from one to another. Temperature, because it's the same type of difference between one or the other. So that's what interval is. It's an equal measurement of quantitative measurement. Okay, ratio is a little bit different than that because it's not as, although this talks about temperature again here, but where it's, you can't really measure and say this is double the amount of temperature, it's twice as hot, or you could say you're twice as fast because you ran the mile 2 times faster than that other person. Ratio scale is actually there's a ratio, so it doesn't have to be exactly between those two. So there is a little bit of difference. So this one's a bit tricky. I can probably go over it again in class with you, but these are the 2 things to try to pay attention to. Nominal and ordinal, I think, are okay, but ratios and interval are always a bit tricky. So we'll get some practice, but ask questions. Okay? So your next step now, based on these, is I want you to be able to create a question that relate to some of these psychological factors using ordinal or interval or ratio scales. So for example, in a car, you could use, this is a interval scale. So interval. So where you know the tank is half empty because you've got a very specific measurement of full or not full inside of this car. So you know that that's an interval because it's that specific measurement that are equal size between points, right? So that's why this one's interval. Versus you can ask, say, so hey, what do you think about the look of this car? How aesthetically pleasing is it on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being not, 10 being very beautiful, okay? So you can get that ordinal scale. So that's using those, and this is both quantitative types of questions, okay? So what I want you to try to do is I want you to try the next step or the next question is creating, the next task in the form is creating questions based on these scales and based on a psychological factor. So for example, smell. Here's a psychological factor is smell. The type of scale is nominal. How does the room smell? Use an adjective to describe. Yeah. So how does the room smell? Stinky, not, aromatic. How does it smell? You're using that one word, and that makes it qualitative. All right. So the way you would do it is you could write it inside like this. Example: sound equals. There's a ratio. This is based on a ratio scale. How loud is this sound? Using a decibel meter, and that's quantitative because you can use that little device to collect the sound and to collect the information. Okay, so that's your next task, is to collect those, write a couple of different questions, based on the different types of scales. So interval, nominal, ordinal, and ratio. Okay, so it's coming up to 15 minutes. I'm going to stop this video and let you do work and write down some of these answers, and don't forget to have done the other psychological factors and how those relate to the pen. Okay, so have a look at that. Remember, we're just for now focusing on the datas and the type of factors. Okay, ask me questions, and I'll see you again for the second part of the video to talk about human information processing. Okay, talk soon.